Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Graham Reed and Antonia Landy. Welcome, Antonia. Happy New Year to you. How cold is it where you are?
Very cold, but for once I'm actually enjoying it. And Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, we're recording this very early in January, so it's cold in all of Europe at the moment, or certainly Northern Europe at the moment. Today, we have a very special guest with us. We're joined by David Pereira, product consultant, CPO, and the author of Untrapping Product Teams. David, thank you so much for joining us today. Please do introduce yourself.
Thanks for having me here. So I come from actually Brazil and I have been working in different places, positions. I started my career actually in piracy. So I recorded CDs for my hometown and then eventually I like technology, moved to software engineering. Then I moved to the other side, which is product management. Then I wanted to help more people, move to leadership. And after that, I started noticing some patterns and I decided to help more organizations. So that's when I quit the corporate road to be an external product leadership coach and consultant. And that's what I'm doing right now.
Fantastic. I love to say you went to gone to the other side of it, going to the dark side and whatnot. Thank you so much. And very interestingly, there's some interesting history for between the three of us that I think that has only really come about very or been known very recently, and certainly to our audience as well. In that, David, actually, you were the reason, maybe unexpectedly, that Antonio and I did our very first podcast episode nearly 3 years ago. It was. And we'll get into kind of the reasons for that a little bit later on, but certainly kind of in terms of your initial and back then 3 years ago, your feelings on product operations that prompted Antonio and I and another chap as well to kind of talk about this a little bit more, and the rest is history. So very, very interesting history there.
Well, time flies. 3 years already since I wrote that thought-provoking post, to say the least.
Indeed, and look, hey, this is one of the reasons why it's been really great to have you on the show today, because look, this is what we want to do. We want to hear from lots of different opinions. We want to hear about, sometimes I think Antonio and I, we can fall into the trap of being in a bit of an echo chamber. We do love product operations. We've seen the benefits of it, but you know what? We do want to hear different views. We do want to hear contrasting views of this, and that's the only way that we can be better. Our audience can be better. The industry can be better to hear all of these different views and opinions. So, topically today, we are going to hear a little bit more about kind of your background and your experience of in and around product operations as a function, as well as the role, and really, what has changed, if anything, has changed in your mind over the past 3 years. And we're going to go on a little bit as well to talk about what bad product operations can look like, what bad implementations, what bad things can look like in this space as well. But David, I'd really like to just turn it over to you to start with and walk us through a little bit of your current thought patterns and maybe how that's changed over the last few years.
Sure. So let's start with the 3 years ago. I think what I shared was like, we don't really need product ops. And I started saying that because I saw a lot of people positioning product ops as this solution. And many times I think the solution lies in having leaders, empowering the teams and solving other things and so on. And I was questioning, do we really need that? And what is the thing? Like looking at my career, up to that moment, I had never actually considered the need of product ops. I didn't even know what that was. And then I started looking at some things and I started seeing people focusing on creating templates on the other. I said, is it really what it is? And of course, there is different ways of approaching that and so on. But that was 3 years ago. And then when you invited me for this podcast, I realized that product ops is very much in the back of my mind. And it's like not something very present. If you look at the title of my book, it's Untrapping Product Teams. Generally, I pick something that people tend to get, let's say, messed up with. Now, I see AI as one of the biggest opportunities and challenge at the same time. So for example, I don't think AI makes anyone better. It will amplify whatever you're doing. If you're doing something well, you're going to get more of that. But if you're already struggling, you will just amplify that. Creating features nobody needs, you create more of that. So it doesn't help the real problem. So lately, I have been more on the side, like I have my fight with AI. So that's the place I have been doing. And now thinking about product ops, I give a lot of lessons, especially here in Germany, Digital Leute Bootcamp, for example. And there's one lesson there we talk about the roles and so on. And I do mention product ops. I say it's a means to an end. It's not my favorite thing, but you are going to see product operation manager role. Maybe it's something you like, then go for it. Maybe it doesn't ring. It's like me, it doesn't connect with you. So go for something else. And in product, the thing is, there are multiple ways to get to the same result. And no single way is the right one. There's the context, and you need to understand the context and see how can we somehow solve problems for customers that create business value. And getting to the answer of that, I think the three of us here can find hundreds of different ways of doing that. And product ops being one of them. In the past, I used to be more against, but today I say, whatever floats your boat. If delivers value, then let's do it. I would not start with that, but if it is already in place, it's not something I would say, let's remove it.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. And oh my gosh, 3 years already. Unbelievable how time flies. But I think it was very interesting being in that space at that time. There was a lot of opinions for product ops as being the latest, shiniest new thing, right? It was growth PM 2.0, right? It was the latest sort of hype beast. And then at the same time, there were a lot of opinions against product ops. And it was very interesting that I think it became quite polarized. But I think over time, I really try to continuously reflect on what makes product ops good and valuable. And I think something that, especially as co-hosts of this podcast, right, we need to be very mindful and explicit of is that bad product operations and bad product ops managers absolutely exist. And I think being in this role, in this discipline, we also have a responsibility to talk about this very openly and also very openly acknowledge in which contexts product ops is a waste of time or isn't necessary, right, to get to the end results we all want to get to. Because at the end of the day, it's exactly like you say, we are looking to build products in a way that, are beneficial to our customers and to our business. So we all have the same end goal. But it is very interesting to kind of look back on the history and the path and recognize that things were very polarized once upon a time. That maybe lack of that polarization at the moment doesn't necessarily mean that we've figured it all out in every single company.
I think there's a very interesting point that you made there, and just to expand on that a little bit. 3 years ago, I don't think we really knew what product ops really was at that point. The discipline, and we always have to kind of make sure we are conscious of the difference between the discipline and the function. The things that product ops people typically look after, that they focus on, are always there. They're always there in a business. And then we're talking about whose responsibility it is to amplify those, to make those better. But coming back 3 years, I don't think we fully knew what product ops was going to be, what it was at the time. A lot of us had some really great ideas. And in that 3 years, it has solidified, it has really settled on a number of key pillars. The interpretation of those key pillars is still out there, but fundamentally it's this, and this sort of thing. We know the areas of the product side of a business and the whole business that product ops will typically be involved in. And I think 3 years ago, we were still figuring this stuff out. So it's really interesting to just not only look back at where we were, but the journey that we have been on in that time as well. And as well, Antonio and I, we have worked for so many different businesses now that it has been proven to be a benefit in different levels of benefit, but there's some provenality within that as well.
And I'm curious, like you mentioned the journey and so on, what was supposed to be and what has become. What is your definition today of product ops?
Goodness. My definition, or the phrase that I've kind of centered around, is making high leverage work repeatable, having repeatable systems. I think that's what I keep coming back to. It's a reduction of cognitive friction or cognitive load, but it's not purely tactical, right? Because sure, you can remove cognitive loads by taking care of people's emails or scheduling all of their meetings. That's low value work, right? The high leverage, high value work from the product operations side comes from enabling better decision making, I think, at the end of the day. and putting systems in place that allow folks to be better product managers more easily.
And now I'll follow up on this one. Who would be a great product ops manager?
For me, it's a senior product manager, actually. I think that's where it needs to start. I'm not saying that people from other roles, other disciplines cannot grow into the role, but personally, a first-hand understanding of good product management practices and a lived experience for me is a prerequisite for your first product ops hire, certainly.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I tend to kind of look a little bit out of actually it's really interesting what you said there, Antonio, because I would agree with that in terms of your first product ops hire. If you're someone that's going to go in and build that team or set the scene from the ground up, yes, I would agree with that. A senior role, and it is a senior role as well. I think that's a piece that we should also be clear on as well, is that it's not an entry level role. It's not a product assistant. It's not somebody that just takes all the stuff the product managers don't want to do. It's actually a senior level. It's a role that people will grow into if they want to move potentially out of direct product management. I would say that other roles, if you're building a team, I think there is a lot of value in bringing in other skill sets, project management, people with good data skills, even HR type skills as well, because something that we talk about a lot, Antonio, is how this is such a people focused role and understanding people, their behaviors, their reactions, their emotions to change, because a lot of this is about change management as well. There's a lot of experience I would see from a very people focused role in other parts of a business that lend itself very well as well here.
And that's interesting because when I look at what you were saying, if I try remembering 3 years ago, I remember a lot of people having, like you mentioned, function and role, like some of the things related to product ops being more like work around the work. So, and not senior people doing that. Someone who had not been a successful product manager trying to make a product manager successful. And that I said, like, this just doesn't connect the dots. But now looking at what you said, Antonio, and also Graham, like in some organizations, they may not have product ops, but they have a principal product manager that does exactly what you said.
Absolutely.
Just same jobs, but different job title.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because I think roughly half the people I coach are product leaders or more senior product folks who have been given that responsibility, right? And I think that's why you make that distinction between function and role, because those things always needed to get done. But I think in, a few years ago, like Graham said, like we were really all kind of trying to define what it is we were doing or trying to kind of set boundaries around it or, like trying to formalize what value we bring. I think especially at a point in time where people were questioning that value. But I remember seeing some incredibly kind of bloated infographics and charts about all of the different roles and people you need in a product ops team. And that made even me question, like, I don't think we need a template manager, like that, because that is so minute and so granular, and it's so far away from the value we're actually trying to deliver that made me then really sort of try and refocus and recenter around, okay, but what is our ultimate goal? Because process for the sake of process, that is not my goal.
Yeah, I remember this graph, and I even remember the conversation. I think it was with you,
Yeah.
Graham. So if the conversation is about the book specifically, let's say like this book doesn't define product operations, but it's not the only one. But this graph is what scared me. Seriously, we're going to have all of this row. I don't remember the number, but there were at least 6 or 7 rows. And I said, a lot of people doing work around the work here. This is nuts.
I think there's an interesting piece that was we touched upon just a moment ago as well, which is, does this, and this has come back so many times, I can't know, over the last 6 months between Antonio and I, about, does product ops need a dedicated person, in every eventuality? And ultimately, I think we have certainly landed on the answer that is no. It doesn't need a person every single time. This is very much dependent on the needs of the business. But we've always agreed that the function of product ops, the things that product ops looks after, is there. It's naturally there. Just looking at if we boil it down to just process and how teams work, the ways of working. There is a ways of working, regardless of how bland or how gentle it is. There's always a way of working. And actually, if we want to improve that way of working, then some effort needs to be put towards it. And so the piece that we've kind of landed on is you don't need a person, but what you do need is dedicated time and dedicated focus on that. And so if that is a principal product manager and they spend a day a week, a couple of days a month, something like that, where they are just focused on that. They take themselves out of the product manager role and they focus just on looking at how we work with data, how we communicate, how we work with other parts of the business, and how can we improve upon that. That's fine, because it's about how do we move forwards.
I would add to that just one teeny tiny bit. It's not just about time and focus, it's about intention. I think you need to be intentional. You can't just let it happen to you or let it happen to your organization. You need to be deliberate in how you work, in how you get good, progressively better products to market, ultimately.
And I think that was my biggest conflict on the need of a specific role. In my tiny role, the leaders would be responsible for doing that intentional. Like the good leaders, they would have intentional actions. For example, how do we make better decision? Like we have a poor data systems here. So let's improve it and let's ensure that this is streamlined so we can work with that. And the leaders that I struggle the most with, they would just ignore it. And they would look at the product manager and say, have fun, my friend. And then we know what happens. The product manager is either unempowered to solve this problem alone, or will get a lot of distractions trying to solve this and ignoring the other part of the work, which is shipping something that matters. And then it can happen the other ugly thing where multiple product teams have 300 different ways of looking at data, and then things contradict each other, and they make decisions based on different assumptions. And then the game gets quite interesting. But I always looked at leaders saying, you have to solve this. It's your responsibility. And where do I come from? My view on leadership comes from Simon Sinek approach, which is the role of a leader is to create a space where great ideas can happen. It's not your responsibility to come up with all the great ideas. You need to create a space where this can happen. And you may create that by taking action, being intentional, or having someone to help you with. So, which for me was either a principal or sometimes a coach.
Dive into that a little bit with you, David, because I fundamentally don't disagree with that as a let's call it an ideology for the moment. I don't mean it in that way. I want to play that through with you. Who are those? Who give me an example of those leaders? Are you talking CPOs? Are you talking directors of product, heads of product, or all of the above? What sort of individuals and roles are you talking?
So that has a boring depends. So I specifically talk about leaders. If I think about an organization which had CPO, head of product, and then product managers, I was talking about the CPO either figuring out with the head of products and then doing that. In another organization that would be CPO and product managers directly, startup, CPO. So it depends the level of the organization. But in another organization where we would have like CPO, several VPs, and then head of products, and then group product managers, that's where things get massively complicated. And I don't have an answer who should be ultimately accountable for that, because in this case, it will be a shared accountability.
Yeah, and certainly, certainly wasn't pushing you for a very specific, answer that covers all. It's just interesting to kind of frame the next part of this, because my experience has been when I've been both in product management and in product operations as well, is the product hierarchy of a business is super focused on delivery, on what we're building, not how we're doing it and how can we improve upon that. And I know you've not said this here, but if I look at kind of some suggestions sometimes, which is, well, look, the product managers just get together and figure this stuff out. They barely have time to talk about, interdependencies, within their products, let alone how are we then going to go and work away and improve and agree on this is how we should all work together and all the guidelines and things like that. They're so delivery focused, they don't even have the time to think about anything else. So where does that time come from for a very delivery focused business to have the time to then look at how do we improve any aspect of how we're working?
It's very unlikely a product manager will have the time to do that. So in my experience, for example, let's take data. It's a classic problem. If I see it's a problem, I will either figure out how to solve it as a leader and then give the solution to the team so they can use it collaboratively, or I will say, one product manager, you solve it, but then I get a product manager out of the product work for some time until this gets sorted out, because it needs focus. You can't do that without focus.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think for me, I think we actually are aligned on whose responsibility it is to see that this stuff get done. But again, right, there's many different solutions as to how you get there. And I think what I really find compelling about product ops as a specific role is that you can see things end to end, right? You might sometimes run the risk of, if you have a shared responsibility around product ops, and you can still run pretty well with that. I have to be honest. I'm also not very much an advocate that every single company needs to have a product ops person. Certainly, you can absolutely deputize that function. You can make it a shared responsibility, and you can be intentional, and it can run fairly well. I love the fact that a product ops person or team can really have a holistic overview over what happens, because eventually you may run the risk that you have several quick fixes because you have a day job to get back to, right? That at the end of the day don't fit well together. So you have fragmented bits of improvements, but not necessarily one coherent system.
No, and I think this is valid. It's understanding what you need to improve and what are the challenges the team face. So today, I'm less dogmatic than I used to be in the past. I think that's a change. Yeah, get some gray hair here, things can start changing and so on. Today, I think like there is a series of jobs to be done in any product organization. And for me, like, you need to get it done. So how you're going to get that done, it's about defining like who is responsible for that. For me, it's more important the responsibility the person has than the job title. But it's important that the person has the ability to do that. And if the person doesn't have, someone needs to get that capability, or you get in the market someone who could help. So sometimes I see like what we need is someone who has done that or has seen that to help us with this challenge. So let's improve it. Or we're going to have to learn our way up. And that means hitting the wall. And it hurts because we are going to get mistakes. So it's always easier to have someone who understands the problem we are talking about. So today I look at things like, what is the problem we're having? And do we have someone in-house that can solve this thing? We don't have it, so let's get some help so we don't solve for much. I look at things like this. And who is that person? I try to find, for example, if it's a challenge that I see a post from Antonia, I say, Antonia is posting about something here that maybe we need to solve it. I may call Antonia and say, hey, can you solve this for us? I wouldn't care if Antonia is a product ops manager or Antonia is a product ninja or product whatever. If she has the ability of solving that, help us fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was also a big part of the growth. Honestly, I think our titles are still extremely fragmented. Some have settled on product ops, some say product enablement, some go to change management, right? But we're all in a very similar space. But at the end of the day, you have to refocus on what you're there to do, right? On the problems you're there to solve. But it's very interesting because I think just as we know for a fact that bad, ineffective product management exists, we also know that bad and effective product ops exists. And David, I would love to hear a little bit more about your book, because I think the challenges that make bad product management bad are also very similar to the ones that make bad product ops bad.
Sure. So first, everything that is in the book that I point fingers are mistakes that I did. And The stories are my own doings, problems that I created. Overall, the book is 3 parts. Trapping product teams, the name. So first part is like, let's acknowledge the mess we're in. Let's just understand what is going on. And what is going on might be things like we are doing things without knowing why we're doing that. We don't know what success looks like. We do whatever stakeholders want. Or, for example, we just plan by capacity. We just bloat our roadmap and then bloat our backlogs. And we do these kind of things. We run meeting marathons and all of this types of things. So this is the first part. Let's just acknowledge the issues we have. And the second is like, once I uncover the problems I have, let's decide which ones I'm going to solve because I can't solve everything at once. So let's say I'm in a big mess. We need to start with prioritization. What is the goal that we are trying to pursue? What is the impact we want to create? Second part is about untrapping the team. So we talk about strategy, discovery, delivery, measuring results, stakeholder relationship, team setup, and so on. And there I say, I'm not going to create anything new here. There's a lot of good material out there. So I point to others' work, like Teresa Torres, also Ash Moria, Melissa Perry, and works on like how we get these things done. And the last part is, okay, once we get out of the mess, how do we ensure we remain out of this? Because if we sit and relax, oh, things are going to get weird again. So it's about a series of health checks. How is my strategy helping us making decisions faster or so on? And how are we uncovering what makes something valuable for end users? How we're delivering and so on. And I end with a set of principles that help people make better decisions. And in the end, the book itself is a book about hope. Hope that no matter the situation you're in, you can always make slightly better if you decide to take action. But it's a journey. We can't transform any organization in a quarter or even 2 quarters. It's going to take time. And you embrace the journey and just accept some things are not going to be the way you would like them to be.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that. I was actually just on a call with somebody earlier today and they were talking me through kind of their organizational challenges. And it was like velocity. We're not living our strategy. We don't have alignment. People don't make good on their commitments. We have interdependencies. And I just like, you get to pick 2 per year. And that will have been a good year.
I'm curious, David. You mentioned journey, and I think that's a really important phrase that you used there. With the any customers, don't name them, but any customers that you've worked with that think that it's not a journey, that it should be kind of, hey, come in 3 months, 6 months, and we should then be, the next Google, Amazon, whatever. We should be super refined. We should be super slick in terms of our ways of working, and don't appreciate the journey, the change management ultimately that's going to go on to improve.
Yeah, so that's one thing. I'm still figuring out how I start a relationship with any customer. As for me, like facing reality is very important for both because otherwise we get frustrated. So one of the things I created, I call as the product health check. And this is understanding like, first, how do people make decisions? And when I look in the day-to-day, like soft engineers, many soft engineers, they would make decisions based on what is in the ticket. Depending on what is in the acceptance criteria, that's how they will make decisions. And then I look, for example, at product managers. I say, well, I have a list of features in the roadmap and I have to figure out how to implement these features. Then I start understanding like, what is a strategy? And I ask people, tell me what is a strategy. And then sometimes I interview 15 people in the organization and I get 15 different answers. So I present this to the organization, say, this is what I figured out. This is what is happening. People understand strategy like this. They understand the vision like that. And this is how they are playing the game. And then I say like, many things could be different, but we can't change everything at once. It will just collapse. And then I tell them like, my recommendation is that we start working here or there and so on. But to do this, it comes with other challenges. And the question is, which challenge do you want to overcome first? And generally, I offer them the following. I say, we have 3 ways of working. 1, I give a list of things that you can work on, and I give recommendations and have fun. Whenever you need help, you ping me, I come as an advisor and I help you. Another is I am a coach, I stay on the side and I am helping you, but you are doing the change. I'm not doing anything. You are doing it. I'm just guiding you to do it. So the third one, which is very limited, I join you as an interim for a limited period of time, and we agree on one or another challenge that we are going to overcome together. And I say it's very important that during this time, all the other challenges we will simply ignore. Even if we don't like it is happening this, but we acknowledge we cannot solve everything. And we will practice improving your organization with product management, which means start by prioritizing and then focus one at a time. And you know what happens? Some customers don't like that. Then they don't hire me. And I'm very happy that they don't hire me because we both would be frustrated. And some like this. And then we have a good relationship.
Antonio, have you faced similar things in your consulting work?
Yeah, it's so funny, David, that you mentioned facing reality, right? Because that is such a strong theme. I think even when you're applying for a product ops role, right? And the only reality you know is what was in the outreach email, what was in the job description. And that is a version of reality, right? Obviously, as a coach and consultant, we have that luxury that we can go in and kind of make up our own mind or have a sort of assessment. But then we have to feed back that reality to senior leaders, to the people who might want or not want to engage us. And it's that sometimes it can be quite a shock, right? It's very similar to when you first implement a widely adopted data dashboard and people kind of rebel a little bit against what the numbers are telling them because it breaks with their reality or their assumption of what reality was. So it's such an important step, but it's very interesting that I think, David, what makes you successful is exactly the modus operandi I would expect of any good product ops manager as well, right? Come in, try to understand the organization, figure out what's wrong, figure out your key leverage areas, and then work on that and nothing else.
That's the point where we agreed. I think that's the point where never disagreed with. There is this job to be done. It needs to get done somehow. And the question is, who is going to get it done? And it's always like you mentioned about the dashboard. And one thing that I always notice when I'm talking to people, I ask, how do you work? Then they start loading me with, we use Scrum or Kanban or whatever it is. I say, no. Show me your calendar. Then I will understand how you really work. That means where you spend your time. Because you may think you use any of the well-adopted frameworks, but in the end, you're going to do what is in your calendar. So I want to understand who you interact with, what you're trying to achieve, and so on and so on. Just that gives a lot of direction on where people are struggling. You can see, like, are they making, like, how do they make decisions? That's the thing I always try to understand. And how long does it take? How many people need to get involved? And sometimes they choose one of the decision model types. Most of the times it's something like consensus, where they discuss forever, or it's top down. So it's one or the other. But they forget that there are more types of decision and they have different purpose. So I say, okay, that's something we could optimize and simplify for you.
I just think it's so interesting that coming back to that same point again, which is kind of facing reality of your business. And this is kind of then that message, not to product ops people. This is not even the product managers. This is to leadership. This is to business leadership. This is to product leadership. To say, hey, look, you need to look at quite critically at how you're working, what's not working for you right now. And if you are looking at product ops, whether it's a person or whether it's a co-opted individual to focus a little bit of time on that, you need to give that focus, you need to give that almost autonomy, that authority to look at those things and say, hey, look, we need to go after these things. We want to improve these things and be prepared that change is needed here. It's facing the fact that it's not something that I've often seen going back, probably going back 2 or 3 years now as well, is where individuals and particularly product leaders are sometimes a little bit afraid to look at and then admit that, something's not working right. Okay, that there are improvements that we need help here. It's a little bit of kind of like, well, actually, if I admit that, then I'm not doing a good job. If I'm doing my job perfectly, then there shouldn't be any problems. And I don't think that connects with the reality, particularly of a scaling business, that you could have the best way of working in the world for a business of X size, but as your business becomes 2, 3, 5 times as big, those same ways of working just don't work anymore. And so you do have to pivot. It's not about admitting that you've done badly, you've implemented something badly. It's much more about recognizing that change is needed, that we need some additional help and support. And it comes back to what you said earlier, David, which is product leaders should be enabling that change to happen. They should be enabling people, whoever they are, to implement those changes, not sitting there and going, oh, I need to solve all these problems myself because I'm the leader.
Yeah. Although I will add something to that. The problem is that there are several different versions of reality, right? If you're a CPO, you're high up in the clouds, you do ideally strategically focused work every single day, and all you feel is slowness, right? We are too slow. We are missing the mark. We have a solid strategy, but we're not delivering on it. Competitors are getting ahead of us. We are too slow. But having that presence of mind to go, well, why might we be slow? Right? You know, like it's the symptom versus the cause. And I think certain symptoms are very acutely felt by most folks in the organization, but we may all be coming to different conclusions as to why we are slow, right? A PM might have a very, very different idea of what is slowing them down than their head of product or the CPO. So it's not very straightforward to have that, to even be able to, right? Especially if you've been in an organization since day one, for example, to be able to step that far back to say, we are slow, I'm feeling this very acutely, and here is the reason.
Yeah, one of the things that is very hard is like once you're in the business, you're very busy. There are many things. And if you don't create time to think, literally time to think, you are never gonna acknowledge reality where it needs changing. And sometimes you need to accept that you lack the experience and expertise to solve certain problems. And that may hurt or make you feel incompetent. But what I realize is like many times you're going to raise to your level of incompetence, but doesn't mean you have to remain there. Once it happened that I was responsible for 3 product managers as a head of product, and some things happened inside the organization, then from one day to the other, I became responsible for 15. And that was entirely different. And I knew I would screw up from day one. But that's me. I looked at that. I said, well, it's not going to work. So I said, I need someone who has done that already and support me. I said, okay, I have this now, but I need some support. So I hired someone who was actually way smarter than me. And then this person helped me make this a success. And I'm very happy I made that decision. Remember, some of the other leaders criticized me, saying like, are you going to bring someone that can just get your position? I said, well, I don't want to fail, so it's better to get someone that can help us. And it was a really good journey. And I did that because in the past, I raised to my level of incompetence and I tried to do everything on my own. And if you don't have a mentor, someone who has done what you're about to do, you're going to learn the hard way. That's what happens. So you will face some bitter failures, hopefully not dramatically one, but it will hurt. So it's like, how do you want to learn? So I prefer taking some shortcuts, generally a mentor.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that ties us perfectly back round to this idea of bad product operations. Because I think in my experience, the product ops folks who struggle the most and who at the end of the day deliver the least amount of value, if I would say so bluntly, are actually the ones that are alone, that are a team of one, that are working in organizations who've never had product ops before, who don't really have an idea of what it can do for them, or the folks who have kind of been thrust in this role without much personal knowledge or experience of good product management.
Interesting. I mean, that is a great experience there. You know, I hear what you're saying about kind of people that are teams of one for sure. It's a very lonely place for sure. There's very little opportunity to kind of bounce those ideas off, to share the load, share the cognitive load, share the burden, etc., etc. I think that in my experience, I keep coming back to this idea, this phrase of maturity. And I never mean maturity in terms of age or anything like that. What I mean is in terms of maturity of thinking, that, you know, there is such a desire that you've suddenly got some of the keys to the castle and look at all the changes that we could go and make and all the improvements we could go and make. And actually that maturity of thinking stops straight away to think, well, what's the ability for this business to change, to mature, to move from X to Y to Z, to go to 2.0. The businesses I've worked in and certainly do now, you know, a whole range of appetites for change, the ability, just the pure time and lack of pressure on in particular the product teams to do some of the changes, and sometimes those changes are not only impactful but take a lot of effort. They take a lot of input from the PMs and the teams themselves as well. So a maturity of thinking is, what is the reality? What's the pragmatic approach to being able to implement some of these changes? And I think that's where good product ops is seen, is if you kind of take that step back and analyze what can we actually do in reality, rather than just going in and saying, well, here's a whole bunch of changes and we're going to do it in 6 months and it's all going to be lovely. And it's just fundamentally just not going to happen.
It's true. You can't change everything at once. And, once you change something, you need to see, like, did it happen the effect you expect to? And is the team sticking to it? And if not, why? So you need to keep because there will be some nuance you uncover only once it happens. Of course, an experienced person can't foresee, but we're people. We are unpredictable.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I like to say that we work with the biggest variable on earth, and it is so true.
It is, absolutely. And it certainly goes back to, what you're talking earlier about, David, about, doing that assessment with the business and saying, look, hey, here is everything, and pick some things that we want to go after. And Antonio, you said the same as well. Pick the things that we want to go after and go with it. And if you like it, great, we'll work together. And if you don't like it and you want to do more, you want to go after everything at the same time, okay, well, then that's probably not possible, realistically. And I think that's a key takeaway here, is that, it doesn't matter if you're looking at product management, product ops, anything in between. And then a dose of reality is so important here about what can you actually do and implement and what change can you effect. And you need to be a bit realistic with that. You can be ambitious, but still be in the realms of reality, if nothing else. We are certainly almost out of time. I'd really love to kind of get any final thoughts from you, kind of in this realm of bad product ops, and what are potentially some of the things to avoid in terms of thinking and approaches.
So what I think is, it's not about the title, it's about the challenge you face and who is the best person to solve that. And that's very important. Start with the challenge and then you figure out the how. Sometimes I see some people, regardless of the job title, come in very excited and they have been used to a certain process or way of working and they want to bring that in. That might have worked very well in some other places, but the challenge your current place face should be how you make your decisions. So based on that, then you choose the how. I always think, like, a good product person has a toolbox. It reminds me of a day I had a problem with my sink here. The guy came here with a very big tool and he opened that. And there were so many things there. I didn't even know the name in Portuguese, which is my mother language. And then he took one thing, he went there and he did a few things there on the pipes and boom, fixed. And that's what I see in a good product person. You have a very vast toolbox, but you don't try bringing everything at once. You look at the problem, understand the problem, and then you pick that one thing and say, at this moment, this is the only thing I need right now. So that's what I say, like, regardless of your position, start with the challenge, find the right tool, and do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think regardless of who ends up executing, to me, good product ops is specific, it's strategic, and it's measurable. And at the end of the day, you're working to enable the organization to reach greater heights. And that's all that matters.
Couldn't have ended that on a better note there. We are out of time today. It's been incredibly thought-provoking for myself, certainly. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. And coming back, from 3 years ago to today, really, really great to speak to you and get your thoughts on this. And I think that's absolutely what this show is about, is, look, let's test what Antonio and I know and what we think, and get your opinions on this. And I've certainly learned a lot myself.
Thanks for inviting me. It was a very nice exchange.
So I would like to thank our special guest, David Pereira, for everything that we have shared today. Do please connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Please do check out David's book, Untrapping Product Teams. I'm going to put a little link on the bottom here somewhere to where you can go and find that if you've not found it already. Thank you, everybody, for watching today. Antonio and I will welcome you back on the next episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you, everybody.